Hello and welcome to today's event, Going Social in Local Government, how the city of Walla Walla, Washington uses social media to engage its population. I'm Dustin Heisler, Chief Innovation Officer for eRepublic, the parent company of government technology. I'm excited to serve as moderator for today's event. I just want to say thank you for joining us. I know we're in for an informative session over the next 60 minutes. Before we dive in, a couple of brief housekeeping notes. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to all registrants within 48 hours. You can use this recording for your reference or feel free to pass it on to your colleagues. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and you can participate in Q&A with us by asking questions at any time during the presentation. You should see a Q&A box at the bottom left of the presentation panel. Please send in your questions and as they come up throughout the presentation. Our speakers will address as many of these as we can during the Q&A portion at the close of our webinar today. If you'd like to download a PDF of the slides for this presentation, you can also do so by clicking the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. Also, during today's webinar, you'll be able to connect with your peers on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Please use hashtag GovTechLive to connect with your peers across the government technology platform. At the close of the webinar, we'll encourage you to complete a brief survey about the presentation. We'd love to hear what you think. If you're unable to stay with us for the entire webinar but would like to complete the survey, as much as you're able to, please click the red survey widget at the bottom screen to launch the survey. Otherwise, it will pop up once the webinar concludes. At this time, we recommend that you disable any pop-up blockers, and if you're experiencing any media player issues or have any other technical problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking the help button at the bottom of the console. Today I'm joined by a pretty amazing group of individuals that are doing some pretty great things with social media in the public sector. Joining me today is David Braun, the Communication Manager for the City of Walla Walla in Washington State, and Anil Chawla, Founder and Chief Executive Officer for ArchiveSocial. The agenda for this morning's presentation is to really dive into what's happening with social media in the public sector. We'll then let David take over and walk through how the City of Walla Walla is doing social media to engage citizens and lessons learned and tactics that you can apply within your own agency. And then we'll go to Anil to talk about the critical need to archive and how to manage risk, followed by a brief demo of the ArchiveSocial console and some open Q&A. So to kick things off, I wanted to provide some of our own research on the social media landscape and what we're seeing at Government Technology Magazine as individuals are using social media in new ways in government. Now, the first thing when you think about social media, you traditionally think about the younger generations and the younger demographics. But we're really starting to see social media become more prevalent across all age demographics. In fact, when you look at the chart on the screen, social media is really prevalent among the baby boomers, and we're starting to see a lot of their behavior and a lot of them use social media in new ways that we never before experienced. In fact, many of the younger generations have left some of the more popular social media applications to use messaging applications. So the landscape is constantly evolving and changing, and this creates lots of opportunities for government to plug in. And what's on the screen right now really just shows you how every new technology that's coming out has some type of social media component to it. This is just a snapshot of the technologies that we're seeing and that we're tracking within the public sector space. There's many opportunities for government to plug in. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is what are the driving trends? What are those key enabling factors that are causing individuals to use social technologies to connect with businesses, to connect with government, and to connect with each other in new ways? Well, there's three trends that we've identified at government technology. The first trend is hyperconnectivity. We now have more devices on planet Earth than people, and this is continuing to exponentially increase. The next trend is critical mass. 82% of the United States is connected to the Internet. That's about 277 million people, and this is continuing to exponentially grow. And then, of course, the last trend, which is energy and engagement. What you see on the screen right now is what happens every 60 seconds online. There's 3.3 million Facebook posts. There's 4 million Google searches. You have a variety of different types of activity and behavior that are created online. There's no longer a barrier for people to plug in and create data. They're able to plug into Facebook, to connect with brands, to connect with their agencies in new ways, and it's continuing to exponentially increase. So what does this mean for local government? Well, some of our takeaways at government technology are, number one, citizens are going to increasingly create data in online networks that we don't host or control. When you think about how people use Twitter and Facebook and some of these messaging applications, these are platforms outside of city control. And so there's massive amounts of data that people are creating, and we have to have ways to have access to that data. In fact, IBM recently did a study that said that every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. That's 18 zeros. And that's a lot of data that we're creating on platforms that are not all controlled by government agencies. Number two, citizens are going to expect to query and access information from this global database of data as simply as a Google search. When you think about how people use Google, they go, they search, and if they don't get the results back within the first second, they assume something is broken. Well, people are expecting that same level of functionality when it comes to how they query government records and how they access those. Number three, citizens are going to expect the same experience they have in the private sector applied to government. Increasingly, we're seeing citizens being conditioned by these technologies and expecting that same level of functionality within government. And social media is constantly changing. Just a few days ago, Facebook unveiled something called chatbots, which allow individuals to have conversations with automated bots on Facebook Messenger. And so we're going to start to see agencies use new technologies on top of these social networks and new ways to engage people, and it creates tons of opportunity for agencies, but also many obstacles that we have to find ways to overcome. So today we're going to talk about how agencies are using social media to drive results. And before I introduce our first speaker, I just wanted to open it up with a poll. What's your opinion on social media as a public record? Is it definitely a public record by law? It might be a record, but our activity is not worth retaining. I feel strongly that it's not a public record, or if you don't know, we have an answer there for you as well. And we'll see these results. So wow, the vast majority, 87.5% of you see social media as a public record. This is great. And we're going to dive into some of the changes that are happening within the legislative space that really affirm and back that up. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, David Braun. He's a communication manager for the city of Walla Walla in Washington State. Prior to his government service, he owned a creative agency that designed websites and performed email and social media marketing for nonprofits and businesses. He has also worked as an editor for newspapers for 13 years and as communication director for Whitman College, which is consistently ranked as one of the best schools in the nation. David, thanks for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Dustin. As he said, I have most recently had an agency where I did a lot of social media and email marketing for businesses and nonprofits. And prior to that, I was communications director for Whitman College, and I was editor and designer at many newspapers. And if you don't know anything about Walla Walla, there we are. We're in the southeast corner of the state, and we are known for a lot of grapes, a lot of wineries, our onions, and last but not least, our penitentiary. So, why social media? Well, for one thing, as Dustin illustrated before, you have to communicate directly to citizens. If you aren't doing it, no one else is going to do it for you, and certainly no one else is going to do it better. There are many vectors of misinformation out there that you cannot control. So you need to put the ball in your court, and you need to take it and run with it. You got to share stories about the good work you do, and many times, even if you are covered by traditional media, a lot of times they don't share the good news stories, and not as often as you would like. Efficiency is a big thing. I can reach out and for $100, I can hit everyone in the city of Walla Walla with a Facebook account. And if you spend $100 in a newspaper, what is that going to get you? Not a whole lot. Nimbleness, that's really important. I can react very quickly to any type of emergent situation in social media and reach citizens directly in a way that you cannot do with traditional media, where you're relying on someone else to do it for you. Cost, I'm getting a lot of mileage for my budget, and I like that. We do a lot of Facebook posts that steer people to other digital content. For instance, we have a Mill Creek which runs through the middle of Walla Walla, and it's been channelized with a big kind of ugly concrete channel. Well, a lot of that runs underneath the city, so it's kind of a concern for for merchants and the public. So we need to look at that and figure out, what do we want to do with this? How do we want to handle this issue? There's a lot at stake here: private property, public property, many agencies who have a stake in the welfare of the creek. So this was an opportunity to set up a forum where people could share their vision. And really, in order to figure out what's feasible, you first have to explore what's possible. And this was an opportunity to give people a chance to share those visions. So another thing we do is we broadcast on Mixler each city council work session and meeting. So prior to this, when I first started in October of last year, we had been broadcasting on AM radio. And I don't know if you know anything about AM radio, but don't waste your time. So they wanted to charge us $500 a month to broadcast. And I looked at this. I could spend $200 and then audio stream each city council meeting and work session. And people can play it right in Facebook. That's very powerful. I can also promote it. So it's a very cool gadget, and I recommend that people check it out. We do a City Central newsletter every month, and we blast that out, and it hits about our email list is about 15,000 people. And to give you an idea of the extent of that, we have about 33,000 in Walla Walla. So it hits a lot of people. So this is also syndicated. At the same moment I send it, it goes on to Facebook. I can promote it there, and it's another vector for sharing a lot of the good news about the city and things about programs and services that people need to know. I also share that in Spanish as well. So one of the challenges facing a lot of cities, especially Walla Walla, where 30% of the population is Spanish speaking, is how do you reach them? And we still struggle with that. But Facebook allows us to take this has been translated into Spanish, and target Spanish speaking people in the city with promotion. So that's something that I hope pans out well. It's a good effort to reach those people, and the effort is a message unto itself. So sharing good news stories. Here's an instance of one. We had a firefighter who saw that we had to get rid of our old turnouts, and those are the fire-resistant coats and pants that firefighters wear. They have to get replaced every so often. So they took it to the inmates at the penitentiary, the Sustainable Practices Lab, and they turn them into useful items. So teddy bears, teddy bears that kids could use in the back of ambulances during rides, mask bags for the firefighters, rope bags. So it was a really good PR piece, and shared that broadly. And the newspaper picked up on it, and 2 TV stations picked up on it as well. So this is something I'll hit on a little bit later. But if you're trying to get media coverage, a shortcut can be social media. And I'll show something a little bit later that illustrates that point. So in 2015, we also had the Gentlemen of the Road Stopover Tour. So that was Mumford & Sons, Foo Fighters, and Flaming Lips. We had like 20,000 people descend on the town. So this was a big deal. And a bunch of groups, nonprofits, got together and made this video. And the video was about, I think, 8 minutes long, and it was about $20,000 total. So when I got here in October, no one had deployed it. All these people paid all this money for this video, and it wasn't shared. No one had seen it. So, being one of the investors in it, we took it, shared it on Facebook. We have about, I think here, 23,000 views, reached about 44,263 people, 359 shares for 430 likes. So that's some good mileage out of it. So keep these numbers in mind for the next slide. So this is something I made just a little bit ago, and it was stocking a pond in Jefferson Park, which is just a little tiny pond, and kids can fish for free and keep all the fish out of there. So this is a video. It's about a minute long of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife guys basically shooting fish out of a 6-inch tube from a truck. I mean, you can see it's just fish shooting out of a tube. All right, so that had 29,000 views. Okay, and the thing is that if you're thinking that you need a big money production to get some good feel-good stories out there, you don't. You need a short little piece, something like that, a minute, 2 minutes long, maybe at most. People's attention spans are very short. A short video is going to go a lot farther and be spread much more widely. So that's the message there. I spent, maybe $5 to promote it. It wasn't a whole heck of a lot. One thing that you shouldn't be concerned about is likes. It carries far less weight than it ever did before. So it's not a measure of popularity by any stretch of the imagination. So you can see this, like we had 1,157 likes. That week we reached almost 76,000 people. So it's a different game. You can pay to promote a lot of your content, and it's not a whole lot of money, and that reaches a lot of people. And it also depends on the nature of your content too. Give people content that will either educate or entertain. So here's a case just a little bit ago. So before I had started, there was we had a budget shortfall, $700,000 for Memorial Pool. So this is the headline: Memorial Pool Rebuild Sticker Shock. That was in our local newspaper. And it wasn't a positive story. As imagined, it's what happened was, which is a challenge facing a lot of cities, is the good news is the economy is recovering. The bad news is the economy is recovering. So contractors cost a lot more, construction materials cost a lot more, and we were in a pickle. Plus, getting people here all the way to Walla Walla, which is kind of isolated, is hard to do, especially contractors who do pools. So the bids opened on March 3rd. All right, and we have a $2.3 million shortfall, which is better than 3 times the shortfall that we announced before. So I'm anticipating like 3 times the bad press. So we took that. So I met with the city manager and the Parks and Recreation director, and the first thing I did is send an email out. Why did I do that? Well, at this time it was about 10,800. It's about 15,000 now. So we sent that email out, just letting people know on our terms. That's really important. Communicating directly on our terms. Let them know about the situation in a very straightforward manner. So that allows us to set the tone of the narrative. Our story is out first, and when it comes to public relations, the people who are first to the facts are always in the driver's seat. So luckily, let me back up. So it's not always going to pan out the way you want it to. You're not always going to come out on top in public relations situations, but you can always give yourself the best chance to succeed. So that email really laid the foundation for giving us the best chance to succeed and set the tone there. And then we found out that we had a donation of about $500,000 from Sherwood Trust, which is a local nonprofit organization, and that was going to go toward the pool. So good news. So I do a press release send that out. It had that led with that donation. It relayed the information about our shortfall. But it's a good opportunity because we have a solution, or at least a partial solution. So I announced that on our Facebook page, and because, well, it's good news. It's good news, and I linked it to the full story on our website. And I spent $5. So this is what happened. We had people, they could have looked at it as, the city screwed up again. They are short $2.3 million. But instead, it became a story about, we are the underdogs. We're trying to give the community a pool. And we have some good help here from Sherwood Trust to the tune of $500,000. And, we want to get behind it because really people want a pool. They want their kids to be splashing around in the summer. They don't care how we get there, but they attach themselves to a story. And ultimately they want a story arc. Right now in our story arc, we are striving to give people a pool, and we're getting some help. In the end, we're going to have a pool, and we're going to achieve it. But give them a story arc. Because this achieved that. So this was shared widely. And the next thing that happened is that popular Facebook groups share the post. So if you're questioning the legitimacy of social media, let us put that in perspective. So our local newspaper has about, probably under 14,000 subscribers. So there's a group called Walla Walla Eyewitness News. It has 15,479 members. They're reaching more people than the local newspaper. All right, so that's our story shared on there. It's also shared on another group called My Town Walla Walla, 11,640 followers. So, and also other groups and pages shared that. So again, that's traditional media is not what it used to be. It is not your primary go-to, get the information out source. You cannot do that. The tables have turned dramatically. Another thing, so social media put that out there, and TV news takes note, okay? So it wasn't the press release that the reporter saw. It was the Facebook response. So the Facebook led traditional media on this. That's a good lesson. So when the local newspaper finally ran the story, what story did they run? They ran the story that we had framed, okay? Donors step up for memorial pool extras. So basically the donation went toward slides and things of that nature. So that is a great story. It's a much better result than when we had a $700,000 shortfall. So it still relayed the fact that we were $2.3 million in the hole, but eventually, we're going to get it done. It's just a matter of whether we get beat up in the process. And this really limited our exposure to negative media coverage. So we had TV interviews as a result of this. So I was on TV a couple times. And then as a result of that, there was also another story that the reporter covered that was unrelated. So just that Facebook post and $5 invested really got a lot of coverage, positive coverage for the city of Walla Walla. In addition to that, we have a lot of other exposure because TV stations aren't quite in the pickle that radio and newspapers are in. Video translates pretty well to the internet. So they shared it there and got even more positive responses. So that's a lot of mileage for that. And a lot of support. And let me add that when we demonstrate this sort of political or public support for this, politically it's a much easier decision to get behind. So city council members were more likely to, we're more confident in awarding the bid to the contractors. If it looks like it's politically untenable, it gets to be kind of iffy. So they could confidently get behind this project. and give the community the pool that they deserved. So here's my contact info. If you have any questions about what we've done and how we've used social media, especially Facebook, I wanted to share one more thing with you before I wrap it up. So just yesterday, we announced the groundbreaking for our Veterans Memorial Pool. So that'll be April 21st. And instead of having, I know groundbreakings are really pretty boring. So, and what I really didn't want to have is, a couple gold shovels and some older guys digging holes in the dirt. So we came up with bouncy water slides and a slip and slide, a DJ, and some food trucks. So we're going to make an event that the community can then get behind, because we've demonstrated a lot of public support online for this, and so we're going to share it online. So far, we have 134 shares, 147 people like it. It's going to be a good turnout, and it's going to generate a lot of political goodwill for us. And the thing about this is, I guess what I'm really pointing to is reputation management. The more times that you can share good stories about your city and the people who do that good work day in, day out, the more goodwill you buy. You have to take every opportunity to cast yourselves in good light, because there's going to be plenty of opportunities where you can't. All right, so you want to build trust with citizens and engage them, and this is a great way to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Anil, and he will share with you what he does with ArchiveSocial and its importance. We use ArchiveSocial to back up.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David. Really valuable lessons that I think everybody can really take a lot of different points out of. So it's really inspiring to hear how you're using it, and also how you're doing it really without a significant budget behind it and getting some amazing results out of it. So that's really amazing. So now I have the honor of introducing Anil Chawla, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to put up another poll question for the audience around how your agency is currently retaining records for social media. Anil's the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial, the public's leading provider of technology to help government agencies archive and manage risk related to social media. ArchiveSocial partnered with the state of North Carolina in 2010 to launch the world's first open, interactive archive of social media. And since then, ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of government entities, such as the city of Spokane, Snohomish County, and the U.S. Department of Justice, maintain records of social media for legal protection and public records requirements. The company was selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, recognized as a 2014 Cool Vendor in Government by leading analyst firm Gartner, and honored as one of our very own GovTech 100 companies earlier this year. And now let's look at the responses to our poll question before I hand over the reins to Anil. Looks like 53.5% are not retaining our own records, but relying on the networks themselves, with taking manual captures coming in second at 18.6%. Really interesting results. Anil, welcome to the webinar, and I'll hand it over to you.
Dustin, thank you so much for the introduction, and nice to see about 11% of you already ArchiveSocial customers. Thanks for joining in today. And most of all, thank you to David for sharing your story. Walla Walla, as you know, is a city of modest population, and it's really compelling to see how important social media is for every city, county, agency in the United States to reach your audience day to day, build that rapport, so that when you do have an initiative or perhaps even a crisis or an emergency, that audience is there for you. And it was really nice to see, particularly in your story, David, with the pool, how you were able to create a really positive public perception and control the message. So those are just two of the benefits that we highlighted today of the many benefits of social media. Now, the reason why I'm here is that in order to really achieve these benefits and continue to utilize social media for the long term as part of your communication strategy, there are some important issues that government agencies have to address. We have a lot of attendees here. We have a really amazing turnout for this session today. from cities and counties all over the United States, but particularly concentrated in Washington and Oregon. And public records law is a big deal there. So we're going to talk about public records law and the general legal need to have records of your social media, why archiving is important. The way I'm going to approach this is I want to share real-life examples with you. In our work with hundreds of agencies now across the United States in terms of managing risk and archiving, we've had the opportunity to see what comes up as you're doing all these great things on social media. What are the situations that come up? Why is that record keeping important to have in place so that it doesn't get in the way, so that the legal situation doesn't get in the way of your strategy, so that you can continue on and be resilient and continue to communicate with your citizens. So I'm going to share those case studies, make the case for you that if you're not record keeping today, about 50% of you relying on the social networks. That's a huge improvement. In the last year and a half, about 75% of the people that we polled in this type of session were relying on Facebook and Twitter. More and more of you are doing something about record keeping. So I'm going to share those approaches. What are agencies doing for record keeping? Give you a variety of approaches for your agency to consider. Time permitting, I do want to demonstrate a live archive of the city of Walla Walla to show you how we've captured content around this initiative with the pool and the groundbreaking. In fact, there's content coming in right now, as David, I believe, posted something on Facebook just before the start of this. And of course, we're here to answer your questions, so please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. To jump right in, I mentioned that public records is a major issue, particularly up in the Northwest. And the reason why that is that the public records laws fundamentally define a requirement that applies to any kind of communication that's sent or received in relationship to your agency's business. And records must be maintained regardless of physical form. This is a phrase that we see in many of the public records laws across the country. And basically is a reason why we have record keeping around not only paper, but email, and of course now social media. This law has been in place for a long time. There is no new law needed to say that social media is a public record because you can apply this one. And in essence, the way you can think about this is that a crime tip, no matter if it's received on paper, in an email, or in a Twitter direct message, a crime tip is a crime tip. It's really the content that matters. A citizen complaint is a citizen complaint. And you have to treat those communications in the same manner as you do regardless of that physical form. So that law has been in place. The states across the country have come out and put guidance forth explaining that this does apply to social media. In fact, the state of Washington has really been ahead of the curve. Far back as 2010, the Office of the Governor put out guidance, best practices for social media, and made a number of points around retention for social media, but two that I've highlighted here are that the agency is responsible for capturing electronic copies of its public records made or received using social media, and you really should establish the procedures to capture and retain those records yourself. So relying on Facebook and Twitter is perfectly normal. A lot of agencies are there because that's what just happens. The data's there, and hopefully it's there when you need it, but there's no guarantee. And as per this guidance, you do need to make the effort and put something in place to get that information in your control. And we'll talk a bit more about why that matters with real case studies. But here's one study that ArchiveSocial conducted. This is hot off the press. This is really fresh news. Here in the month of January of this year, we decided to run a study that said, okay, if the data is on Facebook now, can we expect it to be there over time? And can you as an agency expect it to be there? So we sampled 400 government customers out of our customer base at random. And what we found was that nearly 7,800 records from Facebook were deleted in that time frame. Now, this may be content that you posted and deleted and then reposted or just took it off because it's incorrect. Or maybe you didn't delete anything at all, but your citizens messaged you or commented and deleted what they said. Regardless of how it happened, nearly 7,800 records removed from Facebook. Once it's gone from Facebook, Twitter, or whatever other social network, it's gone. There's no record keeping that these social networks provide for you. And when we look at the sampling, we found out that 281 of those customers, about 75% of the customers, experienced at least one deletion. And again, when something's deleted from Facebook, you may not even know that it was deleted. So this is what we call information decay. Information will not stay online for as long as you need it to meet your records laws. So if there's important content in that 7,800 records that could constitute public records law, it's critical that you have your control on it and that it's in your possession. Now, how does that matter in real life? Well, at a general level, there's all sorts of examples of social media records being created. I know about some small percentage of you, about less than 10% of you said, well, we believe it's a social media record, but don't think that what we're doing on social media today is creating public records. And I'd ask you to go back and look at your social media presence and say, okay, well, maybe that's true for the vast majority of your content. It's not that important, but are you at all creating anything that could be a public record? The most common circumstance that'll happen is an emergency, some kind of crisis or crime. In the top left, we've got the tweets from San Bernardino County from the recent shootings. And so there's all sorts of situations that can happen. In the bottom left, my home city, where we're located, ArchiveSocial, in Durham, North Carolina. Durham lost 911 for some population of the citizens, and the only way to get information out then was using social media to say, hey, 911's down, here's how you can reach us. In the top right, there's a situation that went viral. We have a customer that has a very small amount of activity on their social media, less than 100 interactions a month, and then a photo went viral of this unfortunate photo where a dog's mouth was duct taped from a woman who was claiming to be out of South Daytona. And they garnered more than 24,000 comments in just a few days. And so these things can be really unexpected, and they could be important, and they could lead to controversy. And this is happening day in and day out. And finally, the bottom right, the most typical thing outside of crimes and crisis situations and things going viral, it's just a day-to-day customer service that you provide your citizens. And you can see the Austin Code Department responding to a question from a citizen and directing them. And so these interactions, these conversations are only happening on social media and could be generating public records. Now, a really specific example, this is from about 2 years ago now. In April of 2014, a citizen had been following the Twitter feeds in Seattle for Seattle's Tweet by Beat program, which is a wonderful program that shares the police activity for each beat on Twitter, and each beat has its own Twitter feed. And a citizen noticed that they weren't necessarily seeing what they thought they would see on that Twitter feed. They were aware of some other police incidents that weren't necessarily showing up, or they thought they weren't showing up. So they actually tweeted at the police department saying, can you give me an archive of all the Twitter feeds? Please consider this a Public Records Act request. In effect, the citizen made a public records request for social media using social media. So it's a real sign of the times. Seattle, to their credit, said, hey, tweeting to us is not a valid public records request. You need to go fill out a web form. But what you're asking for, again, the Twitter feeds, is a valid public records request, and give us a few weeks, we'll get back to you. So citizens are interested in this information. They are relying on your social media, and they may be interested in that content from your perspective. So if this citizen looked on Twitter, didn't see what he thought he should see, so he asked the PD to turn over their version of the archives. Now, you may not have ever received a request like this that was very specific to your Twitter feeds or your Facebook pages. You may not for a while, but most of the agencies we work with, when they receive public records requests, we're finding that these requests can and do include social media content if you think about it. Any and all documents, all reports of the incident, all notifications of the street closure, say during a winter storm or a thunderstorm, all emails and communications. So these requests, which can be very specific to a certain incident or topic, generally can ask for any communication related to it, and social media would certainly fall under that umbrella. And think about that. So with that broad set of examples, I'm going to get down to some specifics with a handful of case studies that we've seen across our customer base. And I'm going to actually take a tour around the country. So I'm going to start up in the Northeast with Vineland PD, New Jersey, where on their Facebook, they were receiving some negative commentary, and their attorney said, hey, let's just stop all comments from showing up. Now, you technically cannot turn off comments on Facebook, but you can put the effort in to filter them and hide them and so forth. And so Vineland PD, listening to their attorney, did do that. And a citizen noticed that at some point that their comments were being hidden, and they actually said, I'm going to issue a public records request once a month for all of the comments on your Facebook, because it's not fair that you're hiding them. And the citizen actually followed through with issuing these public records requests. It was a really painful process for the PD to then have to go produce all the comments they'd been hiding to prove that they weren't singling out this one citizen. And then ultimately they put a record-keeping system in place. So if you're going to have policies around how you're going to filter content out, maybe you don't turn off everything. I don't think that's a great strategy, but at some point you may have to hide something or remove it. And someone may come ask for it. We've had many other customers ask for, produce all the stuff that you removed or hid from Facebook. And having a record-keeping solution can make that very easy for you. In South Florida, we had a police department trying to do the right thing, protect the citizens, and shared a scam alert about a local company that they had heard about from a law firm. As you might imagine, the company did not like being called a scam. So the company complained, asked the police department to remove those posts, which they did. But then the company turned around and issued a legal notice as well as a lawsuit saying, we want all of the records of you calling us a scam, including everything, and that would include the content on Facebook that they had asked the police department to remove. So this is a tough legal situation. You've got to deal with it. But what you don't want to do is start off on the wrong foot. You don't want to start off and say, well, sorry, I don't have records anymore of what I had communicated. That puts you in a really disadvantaged legal position. So this police department was able to immediately produce the social media content. The social media page is up, alive, and thriving, and they'll address this like any other litigation that a government agency faces. San Marcos, Texas. If you remember the flooding last year in Central Texas, Oklahoma, this is the largest floods ever recorded in the state of Texas. And the social media archive proved critical because San Marcos was receiving public records requests related to their emergency management. And not only that, but 6 months or 5 months after the first flood, they had a second flood. And so they actually used their social media archive not only for the legal purposes, but from a communication standpoint to understand what were the important topics that people cared about, to create a timeline of how they were communicating, to share that with others, and to help improve their emergency response. Santa Barbara PD, California. So we're almost around a circle around the country here. This is another public information request where the PD was involved with executing the city's gun buyback program. That was a controversial event, as you all know, but that was their responsibility, is to run this event. And the Facebook page had a lot of controversy around this gun buyback. And actually 3 weeks after they started a free trial of our solution, received a public records request from the NRA. As you know, the NRA is really interested in seeing how these events are run and making sure that they're compliant with law. And the PD was able to, in a few clicks, produce all of the conversation and communications around the gun buyback. And again, continue on with using social media, informing the public, and not having to shut it down or be worried about what they're doing there, because they were following protocol and they had all the record keeping in place they needed to have. And finally, to Spokane, Washington. This is a city that does what every other city does, is promote local events. And unfortunately, a few years back, there was a lawsuit filed when a young man died on a kayaking trip. And that kayaking trip had been promoted on the city's Facebook page. And the lawsuit said, we want all the communications about this trip, including what was on Facebook. And so again, this is our situation where social media touches what you do. It touches how you serve your citizens and communicate to them. It may be pulled into legal discovery, even if it's not a public records request. And simply being able to produce it and move on with your communication strategy is a really powerful thing to do, unlike a lot of agencies who've had to shut down their presence or get extra risk averse because of social media being touched by a legal situation. So that's the goal here, is how do we ensure that you have the record keeping in place, just like you do for email, the protections that you have in place for a lot of other traditional activities in government, because lawsuits and legal situations do arise, controversy arises. You want to demonstrate that what you're doing is what you should be doing, and be able to produce the information and move on. And that's where record keeping comes in. Now, some things to address about how to do that record keeping. Many years ago, there was this approach pretty commonly to have this one-way communication and turn off the comments on Facebook. We strongly encourage you to utilize social media, have that two-way dialogue, but also recognize that if you do try to turn off the two-way, you really can't. You cannot turn off Facebook comments. You can try to filter them, as I mentioned. You can't turn off private messaging on all the platforms. You can't turn off Twitter mentions. So really should embrace social media as a two-way dialogue. You cannot rely on the social media to keep your data forever. Again, most agencies are there today where they're hoping the data is on Facebook and Twitter, but there is no obligation that the network has to have your data. In fact, Facebook has information on their law enforcement page that says, if you want data from us, you can issue a subpoena, but you need to do that before the data is deleted. After it's deleted, there's no guarantees. And finally, copy and paste is something that I used to promote, and many agencies still use. I really do praise agencies that are at least copying and pasting or taking screenshots to protect their information, because having some record is better than none. But it's really not a long-term strategy, and it's really actually an expensive strategy to have someone taking screenshots and then ultimately having to try to search those screenshots, and then potentially those records not even being that valuable in court because anybody can Photoshop anything. So copy and paste is a really short-term solution if you're not doing something. Is better than nothing, but here are some real approaches that you can look at. Everything that I want to propose here is automated. So the first is finding some automated backup tools. There are some tools on the market for social media. One that's come up a bit is Social Safe, or I believe it's called DigiMe. It's a very basic tool. It's very inexpensive, and it basically keeps a simple copy of the data on your local computer. And so it's something that's built for consumers. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for long-term government record keeping, but again, if you have no budget, very limited budget, it's a good stopgap to consider until you get a proper archiving solution in place. Some of the trade-offs to look for with very, very low-cost consumer-oriented tools that are not really designed for government record keeping is that the data capture may not be as complete as an archiving tool. It may not make it as easy for you to put the information back together. And the biggest thing is searching. When you do need to produce information, that's really why you archive, is not to store data, but to produce it. And these tools are not necessarily built for real searchability around the variety of criteria you face with a public records request or legal discovery. So much better is to consider archiving. Now, there are solutions out there that classify as all-in-one archiving, and some are much better than others. The nice thing about all-in-one archiving, and where this name comes from, is usually these solutions started with email archiving or web page archiving, and they've included social media in the mix. The nice thing about that is you get one solution that has all these different content types in one place, so you only have to work with one vendor, and it makes procurement a little bit easier. But the big thing to consider with all-in-one archiving is there a trade-off? Now, hopefully, as these solutions get better, you'll find a vendor that doesn't make a trade-off. But usually, vendors tend to be really good at one thing and not necessarily as good at the other. And you want to be careful with data conversion, making sure that they're keeping social media in an authentic format. You want to make sure that you can reconstruct these complex conversations over time and find what you're looking for. Some of the vendors have faced some difficulty because they've taken shortcuts. There's actually an active lawsuit right now with one of the vendors that the lawsuit claiming basically that the data was modified and altered and not stored in its original format. So any solution that's archiving social media needs to do a really good job of it so that it will stand up the test of a court and serve its purpose for why it was archived in the first place. And that's what takes me to the four most important factors of a solution. This is how we recommend that you evaluate a record-keeping approach to social media. The first is that this data is out there on the social network. It's not in your control. So how frequently you can capture it really matters. Technology now exists to capture some of this content in real time, but most of the content cannot be captured in real time. So you want your solution to be grabbing it as much as it can and bringing it into the archive. Comprehensiveness matters because you want to have better with social media to have more than less because this information is broadcast in the open. And so you want to have both sides of the conversation. You want to have what's called metadata, which is data embedded inside that technical message. So if you look at a tweet's not really just 140 characters. It has a lot of information embedded in it, and you want all that information for legal record keeping. Authenticity, as I mentioned, there's these challenges now around data that was altered or converted. You don't want any kind of solution that possibly converts your data. You want to keep the authentic records. There is case law around this, and you want to be able to prove that it's authentic in court. And then the most important, in my view, and most ignored by a lot of vendors in the space is the context. Can you replay a Facebook conversation with hundreds of comments on it from a few years ago? Can you replay a Twitter feed and all the multimedia in it? Can you make sense of that information so that someone will accept it and you're not spending hours upon hours trying to reconstruct what happened? That's ultimately what takes us to true social media archiving. Again, this is something to look for where social media archiving is not an afterthought no matter what vendor you look at, but they've really put the time and effort into capturing the data in a way that's complete, authentic, it's frequent, and it has that full context, and that ultimately can protect your agency. Now, on top of the archive, something that's interesting that we've been working on in ArchiveSocial is really getting the value out of the data. So say you're a communicator on social media, the fact that you have this legal record keeping is a great protection because it ensures that you can actually execute your social media strategy. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to leverage the value of that data? And so that's something that we've looked at and we've put together for the customers that we have around triggering alerts around content that may be problematic, really helping you enforce your social media policy by monitoring the content that comes in the archive so that you can react on the social network itself, by giving you those active alerts to your email for things you care about. So maybe you're running a certain event or you're in a difficult circumstance like a shooting and you want instant alerts for content appearing on your social media, or even measuring analytics over time. David mentioned the example of the pool, and initially there was a bit of a negative perception and then later it became positive. Well, with social media, you're actually getting that response from the citizens day in and day out. And so with an archive and the technology that we've created, you can actually measure how positive and negative that response is and actually see that trend go from negative to positive over time and use that as a quantifiable metric of how social media is improving your perception. One thing I want to call out when it comes to record keeping, we at ArchiveSocial do provide a commercial offering for that day-to-day record keeping of your social media. That is required by law, but also there to protect you from any legal circumstance. But we recognize that not every agency is quite there yet. We think you all will archive your social media like you archive your email, but if you don't today and you find yourself in a crisis situation can greatly magnify the risk of a public records request or a legal circumstance. So we at ArchiveSocial have put together a pro bono solution called ArchiveSocial Crisis Support. If your agency is in crisis, you're using social media to communicate, within a few days of that crisis happening and starting, you can go to this website, request access to ArchiveSocial Crisis Support, and we will give you free access to our technology for 30 days to help you out, to help you get through that crisis. Make sure that you have record keeping around that specific crisis situation so that you are ready for any public records requests or litigation that might come out. And we really want to protect your use of social media for the long run. So you can visit this website, govcrisis.social, to learn more about that program. And finally, wrapping up, we care about government and being a resource to you. We work with governments across the country and virtually every state, almost every state at this point. And we provide a number of resources that are at no cost, such as social media policy templates, guides on how to moderate problematic content, and so forth. So if I can be a resource to you in any way, please reach out to me. Here's my direct contact information. And what I'm going to wrap up with here, I know we're down to the last 10 minutes. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of the Walla Walla archive so you can see what a social media archive looks like, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get that screen share going. And hopefully all of you can see this in just a moment as that gets across the wire. And once it loads up, here's what an archive looks like. This is our technology, but I want to focus on the main criteria. An archive that is hosted, so it's not something you deploy that your IT department has to manage. And it's actively capturing your social media as it happens continuously throughout the day. I'm going to give you a quick look at what it means to produce information and focus on authenticity and context. In an archive like this, you want the ability to really drill down and find what you're looking for. So you want those options around date ranges and content types and being able to drill into certain social media pages. Even looking at who posted the content, who was it sent to, having all that power. But what I'm going to do is just quickly do a search here with the time we have remaining to show you what archived content looks like, and again, authenticity and context. I just did a wildcard search for Walla Walla. What we're going to do is just sort this by time descending to find the most recent content. You can see I have content from just about 45 minutes ago. And let's drill down on the photo comments here and find what we're looking for. So being able to navigate this high volume of information is really important in a social media archive. And we have this comment from the city of Walla Walla responding or informing citizens about something. You found a comment by itself, again, isn't that meaningful in social media. It is a conversation. So you can actually, in a social media archive that respects context and maintains context, be able to put it all back together. So you can see that full social media post that started it all. You can actually view the full resolution photo. This is the pool that David had talked about. It's a great looking pool on food trucks and bouncy water slides for those of you in the area to check it out. And you have all that context in one place, and you can even replay that entire conversation very easily straight out of an archive. You're no longer relying on Facebook. These are your records. And in each record, you have the authenticity. You can see the source data, the raw data for that record. It's digitally protected in case you need to use that as evidence in court. And being able to find that information, make sense of it, and then ultimately, if someone's asking for it, I'm going to click on export here, turn it into a PDF, get it out of the archive, and hand it over. That's really, really easy. It works automatically, and it's done at a very low cost. This type of technology exists. Again, we're one of the vendors, but there are options out there that you should consider. And I encourage all of you to take a look at what you can do to archive today. And that's all I have. So it's back to you, Dustin, for questions.
Thanks, Anil. Appreciate it. So since we're getting close to the end of our time today, let's jump right into some questions from the audience. And many of you have been asking about getting copies of today's presentation. And within the next 48 hours, Government Technology will provide all attendees with a link to the recording for your reference so you can share it with colleagues. All right, so let's go to our first question. This one is for you, David. Was there any resistance from city managers in using social media? And if so, how did you overcome this? If not, how did you pitch it to them?
Well, I haven't. I've had a lot of support. They've been really very supportive. And one of the things that I wanted to do immediately is to prove its worth. So social media is great because it provides a lot of metrics. You can use those to back up your case. Before this, like I said, I had a lot of experience with business, nonprofits, and proving its worth and selling clients. So I'm comfortable doing that. So I had a lot of support right off the bat. It just was, because I'm lucky in a lot of respects. If you do have some people, fighting you on this, there's plenty of research out there. Look at the webinar. Dustin provided a lot of ammunition to prove the value of social media in the beginning slides of this presentation.
Great. Thanks, David. Anil, a question for you. What federal agencies are already using ArchiveSocial?
Great question. We have several. We have some point programs, such as in the Social Security Administration's office. We've done work with the communications team at National Archives to set some strategy on this. Currently, we're archiving the Twitter feed for the Attorney General of the United States, so we also work with the Department of Justice. So that, Gretchen, we can take this offline and be happy to fill you in on our work with the federal government.
Fantastic. David, back to you. How big is your city, and are there concerns with storage retention as you record your council meetings?
We have 33,000, and in terms of retention, we also the city clerk is also recording it on her equipment there, so for backup purposes. So I wouldn't recommend using like any type of third-party app just for retention, unless it's ArchiveSocial, of course. But in terms of the live broadcast, yes, we have another redundant system saving that.
Got it. Great. Anil, a question for you. With cities working with tight budgets, what kind of costs are associated with ArchiveSocial?
Sure. What city isn't working with a tight budget these days? And so this is something that's really important that for any vendor in the space to focus on is the budget constraints. At ArchiveSocial, we took a look at what a discretionary spend typically is for a local government and found the $5,000 mark. And we literally priced our product to fit within that pricing. So about 85% of agencies across the United States can fit in what we call our standard plan, which is under $5,000 annual. It's a fixed cost, and it allows for unlimited archiving of social media pages. What we really focus on is the amount of records. So we have unlimited pages, but up to 3,000 records a month. And again, it covers about 85% of the agencies we work with. We do have plans under that price point. We also go above that if you have a much larger social media engagement. We try to make that very easy and a very predictable cost for you.
Great. David, there's a question for you about the tool that you use to broadcast city council meetings via social media. What is the tool that you use for that?
I use Mixlr. It's Mixlr. You can just go to Mixlr.com. And I believe we're paying, I think, $200 a year for that, which is very cost effective. I recommend it.
Great. And then our final question for you, David, is if you haven't started on social media, what steps are most important in setting it up?
That's a good question. So I believe we'll be sharing I have a Facebook tip sheet that will be available after this presentation, or maybe it's available now, I'm not sure. But that should get you kind of off the ground. If you need some further help, please feel free to contact me at any time, and I'll be glad to provide assistance with you moving forward.
Great. Well, I want to be respectful of our 1-hour commitment, so we'll have to wrap it up here. In closing, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us for today's event. A big thank you goes out to my fellow speakers, David Braun and Anil Chawla, and a special thanks to our partners at ArchiveSocial for enabling us to bring this worthwhile discussion to our audience. And thanks once again. We'll look forward to seeing you again at another government technology event.